So welcome everyone to today's session on good metadata practice for open access books, which has been organised by the Open Access Books Network and the Open Institutional Publishing Association. My name is Lucy Barnes. I'm editor and outreach coordinator at Open Book Publishers, which is a scholar-led non-profit OA press, and I'm one of the coordinators of the Open Access Books Network, along with my colleagues Silke Davidson from OAPN and Andrea Davidson from Spark Europe. Before we begin the session properly, I'm going to just do some brief housekeeping notes, which I'm sure everyone will be familiar with, but just in case, please stay muted unless you're speaking. If you have questions, and I'm sure many of you will, you can put them in the chat, or we're going to have a Q&A section at the end. So if you prefer to ask your question verbally, if you use the raised hand function in Zoom, then I can call on you to ask your question at the appropriate time. As you already know, the event today is being recorded, and the recording will be shared within a couple of weeks after the event to everyone who signed up, and it will also be shared on various social media channels and mailing lists. And the event, as I mentioned, is being organised by the Open Access Books Network and the Open Institutional Publishing Association. So I'm just very briefly going to say what the OABN is, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Paula Kennedy, who will talk about OIPA. So the Open Access Books Network is an open community for everyone to discuss and learn about open access books, as it says on the slide. And we have a number of different groups that engage with the network, including publishers and librarians. And I know from the sign-ups today that we have representatives of both of those groups here today. Welcome. But also welcome if you're not from one of those groups. I think one of the strengths of the network is the fact that we do have quite a diverse range of stakeholders that engage with us. And you can connect with us in different ways. We've got a website that you can visit. We also have a mailing list that you can sign up to. If you're interested in future events, then we always announce them on the mailing list. And we also share them via Blue Sky. If we have blog posts similarly or any other kind of resource, we'll share it via the mailing list first. So it's a good place to sign up if you're interested to see what we're doing. You can also find us on Knowledge Commons, and we're a working group within the Operas network. So if you'd like to be more involved in the OABN, you can join us via our working group, or you can just drop us an email if you've got an event you might like to run, a blog series you want to organise, or a blog post you want to write, or any other collaboration. Then we're always keen to work with other people, so do get in touch. And now I'll hand over to Paula to talk about OIPA.
Thanks, Lucy, and welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along today. I'm Paula Kennedy. I'm Head of Publishing at the University of London Press. We're a predominantly open access humanities publisher. I'm also one of the vice chairs of OIPA, the Open Institutional Publishing Association, which was launched a couple of years ago to support not-for-profit open access publishing operations that are affiliated with UK higher educational institutions. Publishing activity within universities can often be quite fragmented, with people in small teams working in isolation. And OIPA was founded to create a new community of practice to help with this and offer a new network where people can share best practice in open access publishing. We're a broad church, and our members range from established and new university presses, library-based publishers, and individuals or departments working on open journal services. You can see our current members ranging across UK institutions on the slide, along with links to our website and social channels if you want to find out more about OIPA's work. I'll drop a link in the chat too. An important aspect of OIPA's work is to offer shared training across members, including today's webinar on metadata best practice, which we're delighted to have organised with Lucy and the OABN team. It's really nice to see so many OIPA members amongst the audience today. We know that for many smaller and even larger publishers, metadata is often flagged as an area where people need more support and guidance. We're really grateful to the excellent panel of speakers that we have today for sharing their time and experience with us. And we hope this will be a really interesting and useful session for everyone. Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks, Paula. So yeah, as Paula says, we sort of felt this was an important issue to cover. I think it's obviously of importance for all kinds of book publishing, but I think particularly for open access book publishing, in the sense that just making your book open obviously doesn't guarantee discoverability. Metadata is really important to get the books to a lot of places and to make sure that they're discoverable once they're there, that there's accurate and rich information about them where they are found. Distributing an open access book obviously involves platforms and potentially pipelines that aren't used to share closed access books. So there can be some differences there if you're used to one type of publishing and then you're trying to get more used to open access publishing. And it's also an area that presses with limited resources can struggle with. So for all of those reasons, we thought it was important to do a session on metadata. And really excited to have this great panel of speakers as well to share their expertise with us. So I'm going to briefly just say who our speakers are, and I'll introduce each of them properly before they present their individual presentations. But we're joined by Graham Bell, the Executive Director of Editeur, Jeff Edmonds, Digital Access Coordinator at Penn State University Libraries, Hannah Hillen, who's Metadata and Publisher Outreach Specialist, and Toby Steiner, who is the COO, both of Tote Open Metadata. So we'll hear from our speakers, then we will have plenty of time for questions. Today's session is an hour and 15 minutes, so we've got a little bit of extra time there at the end because we thought there might be quite a few questions. With that, I think I will stop sharing my slides and I'll introduce our first speaker, who is Graham Bell. Graham is Executive Director of Editeur, responsible for the overall development of Editeur standards and the management services it provides on behalf of other standards agencies, including the International ISNI Agency and the International DOI Foundation. Graham has over 2 decades of experience with ONIX for books, some of which he is going to attempt to share with us in 15 minutes. Thanks, Graham. Over to you. I think you're muted, Graham. Sorry.
Carefully muted
during
Lucy's introduction, but not so carefully unmuted myself there. Thank you, Lucy, for that kind introduction. I guess I do want to get across a flavour of ONIX. Now, some of you will be familiar with ONIX and some of you won't be. Right. Lucy covered my background, so I'll largely skip over this slide. I've been working with Editeur for about 15 years now, guiding ONIX development, but I'm also responsible for the organisation as a whole. And in case you don't know anything about Editeur, and it's quite normal that you don't know anything about Editeur. We are a not-for-profit organisation, a membership organisation, something a bit like a trade association. But what we do is develop, support, promote standards. Standards for communicating metadata, standards for communicating identification within the global book supply chain. Now, I have a very expansive view of what a book is. That incorporates ebooks, incorporates both physical and digital audio. We also have a few little fingers in the academic journals and serial supply chain. But frankly, Editeur is best known for ONIX and Thema and possibly Editex. ONIX describes books. It's primarily a commercial way of describing books, but it applies to open access books as well. Thema is a subject category scheme. What is your book about? And both of those are used very broadly across North America, pretty much every country in Europe, and places like Japan and Korea, even China, Australia, South Africa, and so on. We're physically based in London, but our membership is global. It's also spread along the supply chain. So we have publishers in membership, but equally we have distributors, wholesalers, IT system vendors, libraries, retailers, other associations in membership as well. Broadly, we consider our stakeholders to be almost everybody in the book supply chain. In this session, I want to just briefly say the way that we look at open access, but frankly, you know more about this than I do. So I'll skip over those slides fairly quickly. The point I do want to make with those slides is that the metadata for open access monographs, which is what I'm talking about, doesn't differ that much from the metadata for commercial books. There are really only 5 differences. I'll go through what the ONIX standards say, what the best practices are for those 5 differences, and maybe ask some questions at the end about, are there any remaining issues with ONIX and open access, or does ONIX support all the things you need to say about open access? If you're not clear what ONIX is, then I'd strongly recommend you watch a little video. It's 15 minutes long. It's a kind of executive briefing on what ONIX is. But I will also say that if you want to learn a lot more about ONIX, just after this talk, I should be doing a training session And in fact, it's the third session in a 15-hour training course that we call ONIX Essentials. It's the basic course, though there's a great depth to what ONIX is. So open access, it's really important for us to understand that you, a range of open access stakeholders, don't have one single definition of open access. We can look at the original Budapest initiative by open access to this literature. We mean its free availability on the public internet, ... I won't labour the point, but there are lots of things within that description that can vary and yet still be called open access. Free, for example, do we mean free of charge, or do we mean free of at least some of the normal copyright and distribution restrictions? Often we mean both, of course, and yet an open access publication may still retain some rights with the publisher, or more often with the original author, including moral rights that are often inalienable. You can't really get rid of them in open access publishing. So the exact license under which something is published is critical. Obviously, OA, more prevalent in the world of academic journals, but what I'm talking about today and what ONIX describes is largely OA monographs. So what is ONIX? Well, it's an XML-based standard for communication of metadata about books and book-like products and other products that flow through the book supply chain. Here's a little snippet of one tiny bit of ONIX about one particular book. We're describing one of the authors here. You'll notice that right in the middle of the screen, we have the name of the author, Kerry Peach. Towards the top, we have a contributor role that tells us this contributor was the author, not the editor or the illustrator or anything else. Those all have different role codes. A01 there means author. A little below that, we have an ISNI, International Standard Name Identifier, that identifies Kerry Peach and disambiguates him from any other Kerry Peach that happens to be working in the same area. And towards the bottom, we have Kerry Peach's professional affiliation. He's actually my old professor, Professor of Social Geography at the University of Oxford. Now, that's just a sample of the sort of rich data that can be provided about an author, and there's a lot more that could be provided. And of course, other aspects of the book can be equally richly described. That is Kerry Peach's ISNI record in the ISNI database. And I'll say that ISNI is one way of identifying people or personas, but in your world, you might well use an ORCID to disambiguate names instead of an ISNI. ONIX copes with that. There's nothing wrong with that. So I said there were 5 different things about open access, and in no particular order, we might take them as credit for funding bodies, provision of some kind of flag to say, hey, this is open access. But also, that flag is not enough. You need to specify the exact license. There's a very specific way of setting prices to be free of charge. And we also will almost certainly want to specify the location of the repository from which the OA monograph can be downloaded, if it's available in that way. So let's take them one at a time. This is about funders. Now here is a little snippet of ONIX that simply identifies Springer Nature as being the publisher of a particular book, an OA book in this case. And there's nothing unusual about this. Any ONIX product description would include this and would name the publisher. For OA funders, well, they're treated a bit like publishers as well. They are not treated as contributors in ONIX, even though they contribute the funding. we would look at that as they enable the publication. So in this case, we're saying that the funder that's provided the funding for publication is the Wellcome Trust. Of course, names are not the best way to identify organisations like this. So we might have a publisher identifier. In this case, it's Springer Nature's ISNI, because ISNIs can apply to organisations, not just to people. For the Wellcome Trust, I've actually added an ROR, a Research Organisation Registry identifier. We use the same sort of structure, the publisher identifier structure within ONIX, but we use a different ID type. 16 near the top tells me the identifier is an ISNI. 40 near the bottom tells me that the ID value is an ROR. But once you've identified the funders, that's not really enough. You need to somehow say, hey, this is open access, because unless you say that, nobody will know. It's not one single concept, so we need to provide the exact license so that, for example, a librarian knows what they can do with the OA content and potentially what they can't do. There is a practical need, first of all, to provide a very small, simple flag, an indicator of open access, without worrying about what kind of open access. And then we would need to provide a license to tell you exactly what kind of open access. So 2 steps to this. One is just a shorthand indicator that it is open access, and that's more or less for marketing purposes. One is a specific link to a license. The OA flag, the simple option there, goes into ONIX like this. The text content tag that you see there is used for all sorts of other things as well. It's used for a description of the product. It's used for abstracts of the content of the product. It's used for tables of contents and reviews of the product. But in this case, we're using text type 20, and that is what's called an OA flag, just a simple indicator that this is OA without really saying what kind of OA. Now, the text there just says open access, and in fact, it doesn't matter what the text says. It could be as simple as OA or open access, but it could be more like this, which not only acts as a flag, but also acts as a summary of the license conditions. So this is a summary of some kind of CC BY license, I suspect. And you'll notice that the text tag doesn't just contain the words open access. It contains a little bit of HTML markup. And ideally, if that was displayed by a recipient of the metadata, it would look a bit like that. A very simple summary of the conditions under which the material is made available in an open access way. But I mentioned that we also want to include the real license. Oh, before I do that, because I added to this slide today, you can also set this open access flag to be invalid until a specific date. So if you're using delayed OA, you can put information about the open access into the ONIX, but say this flag is not valid until a specific date. And there you'll see it's not valid until the 14th of June. In this case, 6 months after publication. So you can specify it will be OA in the future. You don't need to update your ONIX on the exact day it becomes open access if you're using a delayed OA model. I mentioned the licenses, the very specific licenses that the OA material can be made available. Of course, it doesn't have to be a CC license. We give each license a name, whatever the name of the license is. It could be a proprietary license, it could be a CC license. It doesn't even need to be an open access license, because licenses apply to all sorts of publications. The fact that this is an OA license is signaled by the text I showed you on the previous slide. This just happens to be a link to the license, and it could be an open license, or in the absence of the flag on the previous slide, it could be a closed license. And here we are linking to a CC BY license, a particular version of that. Not only are we giving it a name, we're also giving it a URL at which you can find the full legal text of the license. Of course, the full legal text is quite intimidating, so you can also link to the summary text of a CC license as well. All of the CC licenses have summaries as well as full legal codes. And the EPUB license expression type tag is used to say, is this a summary? Is this the full legal text? And you can link to both as the slide shows. You can also, of course, in the delayed OA model, add a date which says this license is only valid from the 17th of October of some year in this case. Excuse me. Fourth thing you need to do is to mark the price probably as free. And that's so that it fits in with the commercial metadata supply chain, but makes it clear that there is no price attached to this product. Now, it's very tempting. Onyx has a tag called price amount, into which the price, might be £9.95, might be €11, might be $15. Whatever the price is, it goes into the price amount tag within Onyx. However, a zero price is not allowed for all sorts of good reasons to do with mistakes being made by IT people. Blank and zero often get mixed up. So we don't ever use a zero in the price amount tag. We actually have a special tag in Onyx called unpriced item type that indicates or can indicate a zero price. Unpriced item type with code 01 means free of charge. But you can also specify we haven't agreed what the price will be yet, and all sorts of other options there that might get mixed up with a zero price. Having a special tag, having a range of special codes allows us to be clear why there is no real price. Actually, that unpriced item type can be used in two different ways. First of all, instead of a price, if it's always free of charge, you don't have a price, so you just say unpriced item type 01. Can also be used within a price to say, well, you might have two prices and one of them is free of charge. So you need to be able to say unpriced item type code 01 inside a price. And the reason for that, of course, is that prices can also be qualified by dates. You might have a price up to a certain date, and then the product becomes OA and also becomes free from a certain date. So we have this inside a price tag. You might nominate the license there as well. Unpriced item type code 01 tells me it's free of charge, but the date tells me it's only free of charge from the 24th of May in this case. So two ways of using price amounts or unpriced item type, always free or free in certain circumstances. And finally, where's the repository? One of the ways of specifying that within Onyx is to provide a website. And in this case, website role 29 tells you that you can download the full product from the location given in website link. Now, that website structure can be used in lots of different contexts. And I'd encourage people to use the context of the website structure to indicate who's responsible for the hosting. You could, if the download is available from the author, let us say, put website inside contributor, the structure I showed you with Kerry Peach. It could be, in certain models, inside the publisher construct, which I showed you with Springer Nature and the Wellcome Foundation. Or it could be inside a supplier context. Now, normally supplier would be used for wholesalers and distributors, but it can be used for kind of third-party hosting of the open access material. It can also, the website structure can also be used to specify location of a dark archive like Clocks or Portico, where the publication has been put for preservation purposes. So a librarian can't download from Clocks or Portico, but at least they would know it has been preserved and in some untoward event in the future could be triggered and open up to maintain long-term availability. Worth noting for XML aficionados, I've used CData in orange there. And the reason for that is the ampersand that divides between the two HTML query parameters, the type parameter and the doc ID parameter. If you have an ampersand in a URL, I'd recommend you put it inside CData. You don't need to do that if there is no ampersand in the URL. Finally, are there any issues? Well, one issue, and I'm not saying this is the only one, but one issue until recently was that occasionally we see books where some of the chapters are open access and some of them are not. And so we've turned that hybrid OA. Other people may use different terminology, but we can do everything I've shown you effectively at chapter level within a book, within an ONIX record. So ONIX can carry quite a lot of chapter-specific metadata. You can list chapter titles, chapters can have different authors, chapters can have individual abstracts, and so on. Now, ONIX is a living standard. It continues to evolve in order to continue to support the industry. If the industry changes, if new things come up within our industry, ONIX sometimes has to change as well. The growth of hybrid open access was one of these events. If hybrid open access is a thing, then ONIX has to support it. But the previous version of ONIX did not support it. You couldn't do the licensing, for example, at chapter level. 18 months ago, we released a new version, ONIX 3.1, that allows those open access flags. It allows licensing, it allows usage constraints, even different funding details on a per chapter basis. And I would say if you see other issues with the sort of ONIX support for open access that I have explained, if you see other issues, then get in touch with us. Talk to us about your needs, your requirements, because there may be new things that we are not aware of. You're in the weeds. We are not. But we look to our stakeholders to keep us up to date with changes in the industry. Now, that's all from me. I'm very happy to take any questions. I think Lucy wants to leave questions to the end, but I will make sure I stick around to try to answer them. Thank you all very much.
Thanks very much, Graham. There are a couple of questions that we could maybe take now as they're ONIX specific. So one is from Christina Drummond, who asks, to confirm, ONIX allows the listing of multiple website references for downloads for a specific OA book?
Yes, it does.
Fantastic. Then Toby, one of our other speakers, asks, archiving. You mentioned dark archives as one indication option. Are these the only kind of archiving that can be indicated, or is it also possible to highlight open archives like the Internet Archive or Zenodo?
Yes, but we might have to add a new code to our control vocabularies in order to do that. Shouldn't be a problem. As I said, ONIX is a kind of living standard. When new requirements come up, we can, for example, extend our control vocabularies to cope with most new requirements. We've actually not, somewhat surprisingly, not been asked for that, but it's an easy thing for us to add.
Thank you. And finally, Michelle asks, how many publishers are using ONIX 3? I don't know if that's something you know.
No, we have absolutely no idea, but it must be in the thousands. The reason we don't know is that ONIX is made available free of charge to everybody who wants to use it. We put the specification, we put global implementation guidelines, we put application notes, all sorts of other supporting documentation on our website. They can be freely downloaded by anybody, and anybody can start using ONIX. Of course, they will have to do their own software development. We only provide the specification. But that specification is intended to make ONIX interoperable from many, many, many different vendor systems. So we have no idea how many people actually implement ONIX, but I will say pretty much every large and medium-sized publisher in North America, Western Europe, Japan, Korea, Australia, and so on, South Africa, is either using ONIX 3 or about to use ONIX 3. Most of the big commercial retailers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Waterstones in the UK, some of the open access repositories like OAPN itself or DOAB will accept ONIX metadata. And I think all of those that I've mentioned will accept either one or the other of the two latest ONIX versions. So ONIX 3.0, ONIX 3.1. As a matter of fact, last week, the Kindle part of Amazon announced it was about to start accepting the latest ONIX 3.1. And that support for the latest version keeps on growing. There are still a few people, and I suspect this is what was being asked about, is how many people still only use ONIX 2.1. And that's a rapidly diminishing number, very small proportion now of the market. But if you looked at some German retailers, perhaps they're perhaps the slowest to adopt the latest versions.
Thanks, Graham. And finally, before we move on to Jeff, Astrid asks, is there a field for funder for content and funder for publishing costs? Because it's confusing to see funders in the same field as publisher, especially on a chapter level.
It'd be a lot more confusing, I think, Astrid, if we put funders in the contributor fields. They enable publishing just as much as the publisher themselves, and that's why we chose to put them there. But there's a code to differentiate between the actual publisher and the funder. And there are different codes to differentiate between the funder of the publication and the funder of the underlying research and content. So I think we have what you're asking for covered.
Thanks very much. And Eric and Katerina, I am not ignoring your questions, but I think we could maybe talk to those at the end and have everybody address them. So I'm going to move on to Jeff. Jeff Edmonds is Digital Access Coordinator at the Penn State University Libraries, where he helps manage access to the library's millions of digital resources. He specialises in leveraging metadata to improve the visibility and discoverability of open access books. And Jeff, go for it.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I hope everyone can see my slides. This is going to be kind of a high-level overview and not as detailed as what Graham was talking about, but from a library's perspective. So the two assumptions I'm going to start with is that metadata is a means to an end, right? We don't create metadata simply to create metadata. The most obvious end that we're talking about today is the visibility and the discoverability of the objects we're describing. So that should go without saying. We want to make these things visible and discoverable. There's a secondary end, and this might even be a primary end for publishers, and that is inventory. So we create metadata to keep track of what we have and keep track of where it is and where it is in our pipelines. And then the second assumption that I hope we all can share is that the better the metadata is, the more discoverable an ebook is. It should go without saying, but I'm saying it just in case, to keep it at top of mind. So that begs the question of what constitutes good metadata in this context. Well, the first and most obvious bullet point is that it accurately describes the item. Both human beings and machines are fallible, and you will see metadata that has transcribed something incorrectly, or a human who has transcribed the title or the author or what have you incorrectly. So the first thing we want is that the metadata be accurate. It transcribes what we have in our hand or before us on the screen. The second thing is that it precisely contextualizes the item. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Graham spoke a little bit about thema and other ways of using thesauri or subject analysis in order to contextualize the item not only within your collection as a publisher or as a library, but within the universe of knowledge. And that's really where the intellectual labor that catalogers in libraries do to make sure that an item is contextualized for the users, so it falls in our collections where it should. The third point is I was happy to hear Graham use the term disambiguate. We unambiguously identify the entities associated with the item. What I mean by that is any given item, whether it's a book or an open access book or what have you, has an author or an editor or multiples of these, and also corporate entities that are associated with that book. And as Graham pointed out, in the context of ONIX, you could use an ISNI, or you could use an ORCID, or you could use the codes inherent in ONIX to disambiguate between two, say, personal names that are identical character strings. And that's also very important for libraries. Obviously, if we have an author associated with the book whose name is Smith, Mary, we absolutely need to disambiguate that Smith, Mary from all the other Smith, Marys in our collection. And then fourth, this is the point where we're actually getting into the meat of open access metadata. We have to, as Graham noted, make the open access status of this material explicit. This is especially important in the context of libraries that are trying to sensitize users to the availability of this kind of material. It's also very important in the context of ordering platforms. Here at the Penn State University libraries, we use what's called Gobi to order our electronic books. And unless the open access ebooks make it into that silo, our selectors, our bibliographers, will not be aware of open access materials, or will not be aware that an open access version of a title exists unless that's made explicit in the metadata. So that's very important. Next, as Graham said for ONIX, that's also true in the context of libraries, we need to have explicit licensing information if available. So if there's a specific CC license associated with this item, we would like to include that in the metadata. Next, again, as Graham pointed out, we need to have a stable link to the item. It's great to describe the item so that people know it's available and we make it visible, but we have to have a pointer to that item. The analog in the print world would be a classification or call number so that folks know where to find this item on your shelves. Ideally, that would be a DOI or something that's more stable than simply a less precise URL. I've joked with my colleagues over the years that there are two kinds of URLs that are broken and URLs that will be broken. So we want something that's stable like a DOI so that if the location to which things resolve changes over time, we know that the metadata is more reliable because it's pointing to a DOI. And then finally, this is something that Graham didn't touch on, but I'd like to bring up in the context of this meeting, is that good metadata, in my view, is itself open. It's freely available. So we should not be licensing or trying to silo or attach some kind of proprietary notion to the metadata that we create. So what can publishers do? When I was first asked to speak at this event as someone from a library, I lack a publisher's perspective. So I'm addressing publishers as someone who stands outside that ecosystem largely. First of all, publishers can provide high quality, accurate metadata for the items that they make available. This should be a given. I understand that academic publishers, for example, face a crisis in funding, just like higher education and libraries more broadly do. But it pays to invest in the creation of high quality metadata because it will make your things more visible and more findable. Second, be sensitive to timing. And what I mean by that is one of the things that Graham pointed out is we live in this kind of hybrid world now where some things can start as not OA and then become OA, become open access after an embargo period. And one of the fundamental characters of the ethos behind open access is to get these materials, the results of scholarly research into the world as quickly as possible. So timing is important. If the metadata is available before the item is, by all means, get that out there, get that out to your partners, get that out to libraries, because it's better for our users to know something's available and coming, even if it's not available yet, than to wait until that item is actually available before giving us the metadata. Parallel to the point I made in the previous slide, publishers should make their metadata open. There are certain publishers, and I won't name names here, we all know who they are, who have a very proprietary approach to everything that they issue. And they try to make their metadata, just like the materials they're publishing, proprietary. There was a case a few years back where OCLC actually sued, I think it was Clarivate, because one of their products, I think it was known as Metador, was seen as grabbing metadata from OCLC's WorldCat and making use of it in a way which was a violation of what OCLC's notion of ownership was. Next, and this brings up an interesting point, because we started out with Graham, who spoke at length about ONIX, and this shows you one of the fundamental and somewhat unfortunate disconnects between the publishing world and library world is that publishers generally speak ONIX. That's the system they use to capture and share metadata. Whereas libraries, generally speaking, use MARC. MARC is the international de facto standard for bibliographic metadata. There are crosswalks that exist between ONIX and MARC, but they are imperfect. There are things that are lost. This is partially because publishers in many cases have different needs than libraries, but it's often because the two standards don't match up exactly. So if you can invest in the creation of MARC metadata, or if you can translate the metadata you have, whether it's in ONIX or whether it's in spreadsheets, into MARC, that is extraordinarily helpful to libraries because that's what we're used to using. Finally, consult libraries. Ask us how we're doing and what we're able to do with the metadata you supply, and we're happy to give you feedback about how to improve it. So turning to what libraries do and can do, we collaboratively enhance publisher metadata. There's a strong ethos in library land of working together. We don't want to all redo the same work. So if we're cataloging in WorldCat, for example, and enhancing a record for an item that a publisher supplied and was batch loaded into WorldCat, libraries all over the world can improve that record and then share it out. So that's the second point, is we share metadata to reduce duplicative cataloging. We do that in silos like OCLC, which is probably the world's largest silo for bibliographic metadata. And increasingly, as open access comes to the fore, we're trying to do that in a less proprietary way. And that's something that I think Toby and Hannah will speak about in a few minutes. The other thing that we do is we monitor the accessibility of open access items. As wonderful as it would be if links always stayed valid, they fail all the time, every day. My job title at this point is Digital Access Coordinator. And what I do every single day is kind of play this frenetic game of whack-a-mole, trying to figure out which links in our ecosystem are broken and which are actually functioning as they should. The other thing that we do here at Penn State, and I know happens at other United States academic libraries, and I assume happens elsewhere in the world, is we champion open access to our colleagues. Even this many years into the open access movement, there's still a lot of ignorance and misunderstanding amongst our faculty here at Penn State about what open access is, how they can leverage open access to benefit themselves, and how to navigate that landscape, which is frankly very confusing. You know, you have gold open access, you have green open access, you have diamond open access. So it's a confounding landscape to many, and we aim to kind of help them navigate that landscape. And finally, I'll finish with this. We are actively modifying our catalogs and our discovery services to improve the visibility and the discoverability of open access. And I'll give you an example here. This is the homepage of the Penn State University Libraries catalog. And one thing we've been doing over the past several years is going back to what Graham had mentioned and what I mentioned, that it's imperative that open access metadata includes some kind of a flag that's machine actionable so that you can tell, and a machine can tell, that this is an open access item. So what we've been doing over the past several years at Penn State is including those tags in our MARC metadata so that we can leverage them in the form of a facet. We've labeled the facet free to read rather than open access for two reasons. One, we found that open access is kind of a confusing term to some people. And as Graham pointed out again, free resonates more with people for probably many reasons. And you can see in the red oval there, our total catalog, if you added up the numbers at this point, is about 10 million items. And to date, we've been able to identify a significant percentage of those, over 1,200,000, that are free to read. These are either open access in the strict sense, that is, that have a CC license attached to them, or are public domain, or are otherwise free to read. So I'm going to end there. I believe Lucy would like us to save the questions till the end, unless there's questions specific to what I said, which I'm happy to field now.
Thanks very much, Jeff. That was great. I can't see questions in the chat at the moment. There is a comment from Graham that OCLC is improving the crosswalk between ONIX and MARC. There's mapping between ONIX accessibility metadata and MARC accessibility metadata, and ONIX is now a source of controlled vocabulary terms for accessibility that can be used within MARC. But I will, I can't see any other questions there, so I will, with thanks, Jeff, move on to Hannah and Toby. And I don't know if we're going to hear from Toby directly because I know he's in a train station, so we may or may not hear directly from Toby. But Hannah Hillen is metadata and publisher outreach specialist at Tote Open Metadata. She works closely with publishers, supporting them in using Tote for metadata management and dissemination of OA books throughout the global book supply chain. And before joining Tote, Hannah's background was in metadata creation and preservation of print and digital material in HE libraries. And over the past 15 years, Toby has been involved in a wide variety of projects in the open access, open education, and open science and scholarship space. Prior to his most recent role as COO of Tote Open Metadata, he was project manager of COPEM. And now, together with Yannicka Adamer, Sam Moore, and Rebecca Kiesewater, Toby is also one of the co-conveners of the Radical Open Access Collective. So Hannah, I think you're sharing slides. So would you like to go for it?
Sure. Bear with me. Okay, how are we looking?
Brilliant, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, yep. So some of you in this webinar work with Tote already, but for those who don't recognise the baboon face in our logo, we are Tote, and we're a non-profit open metadata management and dissemination platform. And we're joining you today to talk about what we've been able to learn about good metadata practice in our work with a variety of publishers of scholarly books, and the journey that metadata takes as it flows through the global book supply chain. So hopefully this session so far has demonstrated the importance of metadata as a tool for communicating the scholarly record. As Graham and Jeff have shown, with a specific focus on ONIX and MARC as two of the key metadata formats in use in book publishing, We have metadata for organising, describing content, metadata for provenance and ownership information, and metadata is increasingly used to enhance the integrity of the scholarly record. The use of well-structured, consistent metadata enhances publisher workflows, and effective metadata is crucial to facilitate book discovery, access, and use. So for today's third presentation, we'd like to take a step back and provide a bit more of a bird's eye view on the metadata lifecycle. So this lifecycle begins at authorship, as the author or editor and publisher collaborate to create basic metadata, moving through production as the publisher prepares the metadata for external distribution. Upon finalization of the book content and corresponding metadata is released and sent to often multiple discovery channels as the metadata is integrated into a diverse range of systems. And then that journey continues into the wider ecosystem and beyond, in which continuous curation takes place and the metadata is used, reviewed, and updated over time. And publishers possess a vast amount of knowledge about the books they produce and the contributors involved. But the challenge is effectively sharing this information across the entire book supply chain, from publishers, distributors, retailers, libraries, and most importantly, the readers. As books move further away from the publishing house, the data needs to be able to stand on its own and convey the essential details. And now that open access is rapidly becoming the mainstream mode of publishing scholarly books, integration of open metadata management into book production workflows, library cataloguing systems, and long-term preservation solutions is gaining importance and urgency. This schematic showcases the metadata workflow of a collection of small and scholar-led publishers through the use of Tote. The diagram shows how metadata is ingested into Tote, managed and exported to a variety of content aggregators and metadata indexes, including OABN, DOAB, and JSTOR, and the likes. Also, how DOIs get auto-registered with Crossref for books and chapters, and how publications are archived in open repositories such as the Internet Archive and Zenodo. So when working with metadata and building on our experience with working with numerous publishers from a variety of backgrounds over the last few years, we've come to recommend starting with the creation of title and chapter level metadata records as early in your publishing workflow as possible to ensure detailed, high quality metadata records are available right at the time of online publication of your books. It's also important work to review and maintain your metadata throughout the book production and beyond, keeping it clean, complete, and up to date. Incorrect metadata records can negatively impact downstream dissemination workflows, which in turn lead to reduced discoverability, reusability, and credibility of your press's valuable contributions to the scholarly record. So metadata standards ensure that everyone involved in the metadata lifecycle use a common language to describe books. The structure of standards also allows systems like title management systems, catalogues, and indexes to organise titles in logical ways and support search and filter mechanisms. Commonly used standards that are likely familiar to you include, for example, the ISBN assigned to each specific edition of a book and ISSNs assigned to a book series, subject classification and coding, such as BISAC and Thema, and ONIX, the standard for communicating all of this information and more throughout the supply chain. We'll refer to commonly used standards throughout this presentation, and at Tote, we support the use of consistent and universal open metadata standards. So those of you who already work with metadata for books will be familiar with the basics, but we have included 3 slides as a checklist that you can return back to. So for title level metadata records, we always recommend including these listed elements as mandatory. So even a skeletal metadata record, including elements such as the work type, status, publisher, work title, license, and the copyright holder, provide a basic descriptive record of essential data that allows for discoverability by search engines. We also advise including the following listed elements as recommended to build a richer version of a title level record so that that record is distinguishable from other titles. A rich metadata record gives more weight to a search result and means that your book can reach a wider audience. The more comprehensive the metadata is, the more likely content will be discovered. So think about adding the cover image URL, the DOI for the work, the abstract, the publication types, and subject classification and keywords. And as well as our list of mandatory and recommended elements in title level records, metadata can be optionally enriched to include the following. Think about adding a table of contents, the related works or the series, and who funded the research. So for open access books, you want to think about adding metadata that will ensure discoverability and proper attribution within the wider open access ecosystem. And to maximize visibility of your books to researchers and libraries, you want to make sure that your metadata records fit the requirements of metadata and content platforms and repositories, such as OAPN or DOAB, JSTOR, and Project Muse. And I know Graham and Jeff have covered some of these elements already, but open access specific metadata includes the access URL, the reuse license, usually Creative Commons, and the digital object identifier. And then additional descriptive elements can include the abstract, subject codes and keywords, the book language. And then author information can be enriched with ORCID IDs, the RAW as an identifier or affiliated institution, and the RAW to identify a funder or publisher. So closely linked to good metadata practice in metadata management is consistent use of persistent identifiers. So a persistent identifier allows for the unique identification of books, chapters, institutions, projects, or contributors. And the aim of a persistent identifier is to provide a single, unambiguous, machine-readable pointer to a physical or digital object. So these digital pointers have two specific characteristics. So a PID should remain stable over time to counteract link rot, which is the loss of working URLs over time. And as Jeff explained earlier, this could happen when a publisher's site ceases to exist or resources are moved elsewhere on the web as a result of redesign or upgrade or organizational changes at your home institution. And a persistent identifier should be unique to provide one single source of truth. So names can be shared in different ways among different people, and institutions may have multiple ways they are referred to. But persistent identifiers ideally provide a single bijective relation between identifier and object. So persistent identifiers are beneficial to authors in that their books are easily discovered, used, and cited. And for the publisher, they increase visibility, sales, and usage. And in open access book publishing, there are a variety of persistent identifiers in use, with different ways in which they can be created and managed. Their adoption and implementation rates across open access publishing landscape differ widely, but as of now, Tote natively supports and integrates DOI, ORCID, and RAW. So a digital object identifier, or the DOI, can be assigned to any digital object with any level granularity. For books and chapters, DOIs usually resolve to specific URLs, and this is usually like the publisher landing page for the item. In order to register a DOI, a publisher needs to be registered with a registration agency that can issue those DOIs, such as Crossref or DataCite. For contributors, there is ORCID ID. So this persistent identifier is linked to a specific contributor, such as the author of a publication, and it's free for individuals to use as they engage in research and scholarship. There are several databases of institution identifiers. The Open Funder Registry is run by Crossref, which provides persistent identifiers for grant-giving organisations around the world. And there's RAW, a global community-led registration of open persistent identifiers for research organisations. And it's worth noting that the Open Funder Registry will actually soon be integrated into RAW. So in the world of metadata, controlled vocabularies are standardised lists of terms used to describe books, ensuring consistency and facilitating easier retrieval and organisation. Examples of controlled vocabularies include subject vocabularies. For example, thema, which is consistently maintained by editor, has the widest collection of categories and one of the more open controlled vocabularies. BISAC is the book industry study group system that categorizes books by genre, and you can also apply custom keywords. There are author vocabularies, including the Library of Congress authorities and the Virtual International Authority file, and both of these have conceptual overlaps with the ORCID ID. So using such controlled vocabularies will benefit your metadata. Users can search for books using standardized terms, leading to more accurate search results. Using controlled vocabularies ensures that the same terms are used to describe similar content, making it easier for users to find related items. And controlled vocabularies help organize information in a structured way, making it easier to browse and discover content. So the book supply chain is a complex system comprising many intermediaries, and many of the stakeholders, including OAPN, DOAB, and JSTOR, for example, have their own metadata requirements and recommendations, and ask for metadata exports adhering to specific configurations of a given export format to facilitate transfer of metadata to their platforms. The TOTE team continuously keep track of the numerous standards and requirements relating to the dissemination of open access books and chapters, and findings are continuously being implemented within TOTE's open metadata management system. So this means that TOTE's mandatory, recommended, and optional metadata elements now cover the requirements of all aggregator platforms that we currently distribute to. So with TOTE, publishers have a free and flexible tool that enables them to adhere to all of those platforms. So just to note here as well, a scoping report focusing on metadata standards and requirements in open access book publishing is currently being drafted and will be available later in 2025. So this schematic may demonstrate some of that complex web of metadata formats and specifications required by different systems and platforms in the book supply chain. And being able to ensure compatibility and interoperability of your book metadata across those standards and different sub-configurations is no easy task. So TOTE's metadata export tool can provide a variety of formats and platform-specific flavors to facilitate dissemination to those platforms. So for example, we've implemented different ONIX exports tailored to the requirements of platforms including JSTOR, Project Muse, OAPN, Google Books, and Overdrive via the ONIX 3.0 standard, as well as to EBSCOhost and ProQuest eBook Central via ONIX 2.1. And to further provide some examples of platform-specific requirements, for example, in 2024, OAPN moved to the thema classification codes because of the deprecation of the BIC schema. So any metadata uploads to OAPN now must contain thema codes rather than BIC codes. And on the other hand, a record submitted to JSTOR must contain at least one BISAC code. Most platforms, as a minimum, require a cover image URL, a URL where readers can download the book, for example, the DOI or a publisher's landing page, and the full text URL for the publication file in PDF or EPUB format. So we've included here some hopefully handy tools such as the BIC to thema conversion table and the BISAC to thema converter to assist with converting existing subject codes into thema. And here's some additional useful resources on good practice for book metadata. So Crossref has a handy public participation report that provides an overview of metadata quality for Crossref members, showing, among other things, the use of persistent identifiers such as ORCID and RAW. There's also the working group of German-speaking university presses, quality standard for open access books report, which is a thorough guide to book publications in immediate open access. And these standards are aimed at publishers and publishing services of open access books. The Tote Wiki provides an overview of Tote's approach to data and metadata, its interactions with the open access book supply chain, and an overview of the Tote Open Archiving Network. And the Tote User Manual is for publishers and creators of metadata records in Tote. We've also listed the BISG and BookNet Canada best practices for product metadata, which covers ONIX 3.0 and 2.1 usage. And Big Bytes are short documents on various aspects of metadata, and these documents were co-edited with Editor. So finally, how can we help? Tote offers a comprehensive solutions to streamline metadata workflows and improve the discoverability and accessibility of scholarly books. Our software is open source, tailor-made for open access book metadata, and the multiple output formats and specifications for more than a dozen platforms are all CC0 licensed. So as Jeff alluded to earlier, all of the metadata that's available in Tote can be fully reused and built upon by anyone else, including libraries. So Tote Free is our self-service platform and metadata export engine, and is free to use for publishers. And all you need is a publisher login, which we'd be happy to provide you with. And then Tote Plus offers a variety of additional solutions to streamline metadata workflows and improve the discoverability and accessibility of scholarly books. So Tote exists to put the legwork in for you, and our solutions for publishers include metadata management for books and chapters, hosting of content, website catalogs and usage statistics, automated distribution of open access titles to a wide range of aggregator platforms, open archiving and preservation, integrated and fully automated DOI registration and management, and open APIs for seamless integration of your metadata with other platforms. So if you would like to find out more about Tote, please check out our website or drop us an email. And thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to any questions.
Thanks, Hannah. That was great, really clear, and yeah, informative. And thanks to all the speakers. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat or raise your hand using the Zoom function. There were a couple of questions from earlier that I wanted to save to the end because I think everyone might have a comment on them. So the first was from Katerina, and it was, if the book contains third-party material, such as a photo with a different license to the main book, or if it's all rights reserved when the book is OA, how does that work in the metadata? And I should just say, before I ask someone to answer that question, the publishers should also indicate inside the book itself if there's material within the book which is not licensed under the same license as the rest of the book. But beyond what the publisher should do inside the book, is there any way within the metadata to flag that there is material in the book which is not openly licensed? Would anybody like to take that one?
Oh, I suspect not, but maybe I will take it. I've talked about metadata within ONIX being chapter specific. Actually, you could make it, specific to individual illustrations, for example, as well. The level of granularity is not specified to just be chapters. But it would be a long job to create that metadata, and some recipients may not be able to accept it or make use of such data if it was at a very granular illustration specific level.
Great, thank you. Any other comments on that one? Jeff or Hannah? No? And then the second question was from Eric. Are there recommendations for public domain resources?
Well, insofar as it affects MARC metadata, public domain, I think, is a CC0 license, right? So it would be treated in the same way that other licenses would be treated. It's not necessarily explicitly expressed as public domain, so you'd have to know. Oh, Eric is saying, nope, not CC0. My mistake then. We conflate, here at Penn State, we don't distinctly call out public domain materials unless that appears in the metadata somewhere. We make a distinction between things that are open access, that is, have a CC license, and then things that are free to read for other reasons but have no license attached to them. That's what the free to read facet in our catalog points to. So getting specific to public domain, we don't have procedures in place for that right now. It's a good question.
I agree. It's a good question. I think one of the difficulties that I've struggled with is material that is public domain in one country, according to that country's laws, may not be may not be public domain, I'm sorry, in another country because the laws are different. Copyright can expire in one country before it expires in another. A relatively well-known example is if you write something in France, your copyright exclusive period can be increased to match any amount of time you spent serving in the French armed forces. And so public domain based on expiry of copyright doesn't just happen once, it happens once per country. So it's quite hard to identify things that are public domain unless you look at it in very great detail.
Thanks, Graham. And I think we have time for one more question from Astrid, who says, in the very first step, production, we rely on publisher workflows, but what can authors do and how can libraries best help to create good metadata, for example, regarding affiliation or funding information? Any thoughts on that? So Astrid says, e.g., if a library agrees to fund OA costs, we require that our institution is mentioned as the funder of those costs. Is it realistic that this information is included in the publishing workflow at a kind of late stage? So I guess part of the answer would be to...
I think
Sorry,
it is.
Graham, go for it.
I think it is. If that's a requirement of the funding and the funder or the author makes that plain to the publisher, then the publisher can certainly put that data into the metadata at any stage, even after publication, if it's discovered it hasn't been done. Most metadata schemas, like Onyx, for example, are dynamic in that the data can be updated at any point. Librarians are sometimes a little bit reluctant they follow a sort of catalog once, catalog it right model, but increasingly they're open to the idea of updates as well.
Thank you. Jeff or Hannah?
Yeah, I would just add to that like using Tote, we just encourage publishers to enter the metadata as soon as they've got the bare bones of it, really, and the title's forthcoming, and you can go in and edit that metadata at any point when you get extra pieces of information. So it kind of makes the job easier for the publisher in that sense.
Yeah. And as Paula mentions in the chat, and I agree with that as well, as publishers, we ask for information from authors up front. So one way that authors can help, and they do this, is to sort of collaborate with that and to provide us the information when we ask for it. Toby, you got a hand up.
Yeah, sorry, just very quickly to add to what the other speakers have said. I think that kind of also builds on the collaborative approach that Jeff has mentioned earlier. Just to say that in a way we are actually looking into establishing a kind of model where this kind of whole metadata curation process will be made available more openly. And that would be building on potentially the Tote model and then framing or branching that out towards like a more collaborative library facing sort of ecosystem, really. So to bring everybody in the publication and the curation phase towards the same table, basically, and work on the metadata collaboratively across the different spheres. That would be, I think, the big dream, really, that we wanted to establish. So to open up those silos, really.
Thanks, Toby. Thank you for that. And unfortunately, I think we've run out of time, which is a shame because I know that there are more comments going on in the chat. But thank you, everyone, for coming and for paying attention and for giving us your questions. Thank you to our speakers, who are all fantastic. Thank you to Paula for helping to organise this session, and also Silke, who's not here. And thanks also to Toby and Hannah, who were involved at quite an early stage of the planning as well. The recording will be out in the next couple of weeks. We'll email it to everyone who attended, and we'll also share it publicly on social media and other things. And there's an event coming up on the 9th of April on services for OA book policy making. So if you're interested in that topic, then look out for details of that too. Thank you everyone very much and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are.